Finance Committee. Please be seated. We will now consider appropriation NGS 63, school lunch and uniform programs for $476,700 on page 87 of the annual plan and estimates. Do we have any questions? Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, is this appropriation in addition to all the other organizations that provide school lunches?
Yes.
That's a lot of lunches for school children. Can we say how many that is in addition to what government provides?
Sorry, sir, I didn't, Mr. Chairman, I didn't quite understand that question.
Mr. McLean, could you rephrase the question? Repeat the question.
How many children are provided with lunches in addition to what government? The total amount.
Mr. Chairman, we wouldn't know that. We can only speak to what government provides.
Yeah, they were voluntary organization, Mr. Chairman, but certainly somebody would have to know how much others are providing that government does not have to provide.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that information, but what I do have is the breakdown for government. There are 769. Oh, this is the, okay. So this figure. Okay. Yeah, the budget for the year that we're considering is 700 to 800 lunches, and then the school uniform programs. The budget is for 200 to 250.
Mr. Chairman, that looks like there is about 10% of the children in government schools that are being provided free lunches. The last time I heard there was over 7,000 students or something in government schools. That's 10%.
I'm not sure it's quite that much, but I think
it's 5,000 now.
I think it's somewhere between. I think the last number I saw was something like 5,600, something like that.
Is it safe to say then that somewhere there is 20% of our students that are being assisted with it? That is inclusive of the volunteer groups. Together, it would be safe to say that we're looking at 20%, because this is about 15. If it's 5,000. I'm asking if it would be safe to say that about 20% of our students are requiring some assistance for lunches.
Well, if your I don't know if your calculations are correct, Mr. McLean, then it would seem so. But
Okay.
I don't have the actual numbers in front of me in terms of the actual number of students. What I do have is the budget. We're budgeting for between 700 and 800.
Right, and if you got 5,000 students, that's 15%. And then,
Mr. McLean is
lunches.
sorry, Mr. McLean. Once we've established the percentage. So once we've established the percentage, what's the question?
No, Mr. Chairman, I was merely trying to establish
The
a
percentage. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Eden, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to whoever, how does a parent access the services there, just for the benefit of the public, listening public? Maybe some guidance could be given.
Mr. Chairman, through you, the service for school lunches is as with the other services where a financial assessment would be conducted on the family to see if they qualify, if they have a deficit, and then we would put the children on lunches if they qualify.
Thank you.
Mr. Connolly?
Can you tell me how much collaboration you do with the service clubs, Feed Our Future, the various other entities that say that they donate free lunches?
We do network with the other agencies such as Feed Our Future. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, through you. We do network with other agencies outside of government, such as Feed Our Future, and we have a release of information form in which we would share information with them to make sure that we're not duplicating services, and we do refer clients over there.
So noting that, do you then have an overall figure on how many students in the Cayman Islands have are getting free lunches?
I don't have an overall figure for in combination with Feed Our Future or other organizations in government, but I can say the 12-13 numbers was 769 children receiving school lunches in that fiscal year, and to date we have 444 students that has been processed thus far for school lunches in the current fiscal year.
Mr. Miller?
Yeah, the question was, who certifies the children? Do they have to get an assessment from you, the parents, and then you send that to the school, or does the school have any decision authority in who gets lunches from either from you or from the like Feed the Future and Kiwanis and other people?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the school can refer, they have to refer to either Feed Our Future or another organization or the government for the parent to be assessed. They don't have the power to put them onto school lunches. We only honor school lunches once we have done a proper assessment and made the recommendation to put them on. But we do take referrals from the school.
And the same kind of financial assessment the parents would have to go through for the school uniforms, because there seems to be a big difference between those who are getting lunches and those who are getting school uniforms. And I would think that the likelihood that the parents would qualify for both if they fail the
In the case of uniform, usually around the summer months is when uniforms are applied for, whereas with school lunches, you'll have parents stopping in anytime during the school year for services, so that's why the number would be inflated for lunches and not for uniforms. Some parents just come for uniforms, and some parents just come for school lunches and not necessarily uniforms.
Are there any further questions? Mr. Connolly?
I'm just looking at some figures in terms of what Feed Our Future feeds a student for, and I just wanted to see the comparable with what government feeds a student for. It's saying here $6 a day per child, $180 a month, and $1,000 per year. What's the comparable?
For you, Mr. Speaker, we pay the exact same $6 a day for school lunches.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
On this, It's okay. On the subject of school lunches, has anyone done an assessment as to whether or not the children are actually getting value, or the government is getting value for money for the various school lunches and the caterers? So first of all, who caters? Are we aware of who these caterers are that we are paying this money to for the school lunches?
We are aware, we carry the funding for the school lunches. The schools carry out the procurement process for selecting the vendors for the schools. So Ministry of Education actually carry out that function, but we actually provide the payments once they reconcile how many children receive the school lunches. So we don't select the vendors at the needs assessment unit.
Okay, so there's a separation of procurement and funding.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough. So I'll reserve the question for Education Ministry.
Mr. Chair, I
Miller?
can tell you that in the case of Northside, the caterer has to submit to the Education Department the total menu for each day of the month in advance. And to get one item change takes about 15 sheets of paper. So, and I think it's approved by a nutritionist or something in the Education Department.
Okay. My reason for asking is because my children do attend a public primary school, and sometimes the kids just don't eat their lunch. So that's something we'll have to address when we get to that particular ministry. Thank you. It's a matter of public education and value for money. Mr. Conley.
Just one more observation, Mr. Chairman, through you, and again, maybe this is something that has been considered, but since we're going through the rationalization exercise right now, if somebody like Feed Our Future is already doing it at the same price, etc., could this not be something that we would hive off to an organization, as long as they're proper accounting, and etc., they're saving government headcount?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm sure the Chief Officer can probably expand on this, but that was a possibility that we were looking into to see if it's possible for funding an organization that would have already provided these services to take some of the work.
Speak into the microphone,
to
please.
take
We'll
some of
hear you.
Sorry. Thank you. We were looking at the possibility of possibly farming out that particular output to a private agency, but that's something the ministry would be reviewing to see whether or not that's equitable to do, whether it's feasible. Sorry.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? All right. Let us vote. All those in favor of NGS 63, school lunch and uniform programs for $476,700, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Aye. And those against, no. Thank you. NGS 64, care of the indigent, elderly, and disabled persons, $1,400,000, found on page 88 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Mr. Chairman, does the government get any reduction on the price of patients or in people that they send to the Pines as opposed to the regular rates if we give them 1.4 million? Are we giving them? No, I mean, if we giving them money, we should get some patients into this amount of money or some portion of it. It is an NGO, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, the answer is that this $1.4 million is not a subvention which we give to the Pines. We pay them for each patient. and we pay them the going rate. Yes, that's what I'm saying. We pay them the going rate. There is just so that I don't wind up misleading the committee unintentionally. There is in another vote a provision which we do pay to the Pines, but it isn't. It is to help with the cost of the administration. But this money here is not that at all. That's a grant. Yeah, that's a grant.
And 4 million is to pay for, yeah, but the content up top says 25 to 30. So if we know what we're paying them, we should be able to narrow that down a little bit. Or you're providing for 30 and hope you won't have 25, or?
The number of persons in the Pines that we are paying for.
Yeah.
Okay. And your question is?
The question is that it says between 25 and 30.
Right.
But we should know what the amount is. So I'm looking to see if you have any room to add in about it. I got 2 or 3 I want to add to it.
We budget for between 25 and 30. At the moment, they're 31.
Well, then you need a budget a little better, a little more than that. With the greatest of respect, Mr. Premier, it can be hard to get 31 out of 30.
You get the drift, though.
Are there any further questions?
Yes, some time ago it was reported in the press that the manager or the administrator of the Pines had removed a couple of pennies from the cash pan. And I haven't seen any reports of the person being prosecuted. I can't think of a crime more hideous than stealing from these senior citizens. And I am very concerned if the board is not pushing to have the person prosecuted, even though there is some understanding that some of the money may have been paid back or whatever. And I know the Premier said I shouldn't believe anything I read in the Compass, but it was on TV too.
Mr. Chairman, as I think the member knows and everyone in the Finance Committee know, the Pines is a separate legal entity with which the government contracts, and the government also gives a certain grant, but we don't control the board and the decisions they make. Just want to make that clear. But from what I understand, the lady in question has left the island and has not returned. Where the police are in terms of tracking her or whether there'll be a prosecution, I'm not aware.
Miss O'Connor Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wonder if the Honorable Premier would be so kind as to inform the committee as to whether the BRAC restroom falls under this vote, or is it another vote? Because I had 1 or 2 questions on that. The restroom came on BRAC.
Ms. Whitaker, while they're conferring, are you able to answer the question for Ms. O'Connor Connolly? Whether the BRAC rest home falls under this vote, or is it under another vote?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the BRAC rest home is actually, the cost of that is paid through the department, and we've already approved that output. Mr. Chairman, just repeating, the BRAC rest home is the staff and the running expenses is paid through the government, and we've already approved that through the operational expenses of the Department of DCFS, and I think it was HCA. I can't remember which one of those already earlier.
That's okay, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't ask you to reopen the vote, but I would ask whether that means that we still don't have the ownership of the property. Is it still left in a very precarious situation? Has it not been rectified yet?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there is a lease arrangement currently for the Brackrest home.
I wonder if I could ask, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Whitaker, what's the tenure of the lease arrangement and whether it's for peppercorn or consideration?
I don't have, to you, Mr. Chairman, the lease in front of me, but I do believe that it's the same lease that was approved previously by Cabinet, and I would have to undertake to give that information, exactly what the details are.
And the final question, Mr. Chair, is whether the concerns for the backup generator and the fire concerns have been addressed.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there were a number of issues that the department is liaisoning with the district admin in terms of trying to get those addressed.
Thank you. Ms. Rivers?
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you, if I could ask if the arrangements for the Golden Age home in West Bay, is it similar to that of what was just explained for the BRAC? And I think there's a Sunrise one in East End as well. And if the member could explain what the administrative and other arrangements for those homes are as well. Thank you.
To you, Mr. Chairman, obviously the Golden Age and the East End are under the department as well, and in the operational expenses already approved. Those two homes would have checks done by the department. Golden Age is fairly new property, and we also have someone at the department that does checks on those facilities during the hurricane season as well for preparation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chairman, before the member, if he would give me a chance, I need to clarify something because I have, again, unintentionally given, I think, the wrong information to the committee, and having now reviewed the purchase agreement between the Cabinet and the Pines Retirement Home, I think it's important I clarify that so that nobody leaves here with a wrong impression. It's a little bit complicated, but NGS 6-4, which is the $1.4 million that Mr. Miller was referring to, is actually made up of three outputs. So if you go to PRH1, PRH2, which is Pines, yeah, and PRH3, we'll see that PRH1 is residential and nursing care of indigent, elderly, and disabled persons. And the budget for this year for that is $809,446. Then PRH2 is management and supervisory services, that is at the Pines, and that is $88,354. And then PRH3 is accommodation and care of the elderly and disabled indigent patients with extended care requirements. That is in relation to persons who are at the Pines who otherwise would have to be hospitalized if they didn't have that facility. And that is $502,200. So as I say, what I said before was incorrect, so I wanted to make sure that members got that right.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Mr. McLean, you were about to ask a question.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I thank the Minister for Education for mentioning East End, but I had some notes here as well on this for East End. Where was it that it was approved for the East End? Is it NCA 28?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that was in HCA 28.
But, Mr. Chairman, that doesn't say anything about that. That, the only semblance, the only thing anywhere near old people is the provision of in-home residential and daycare services provided for indigent, elderly, and adult disabled persons. And then the quantity is number of meetings, inspection and training session, training who? Conducted or attended, number of assessments conducted, number of care and social activities performed. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's right.
Mr. McLean, I'm looking at it, and
Well, I missed it, Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that, and
it does say the provision of resident, if you were to leave out some of the words, it does say the provision of residential and daycare, and then provided for elderly persons. So if you
but in home.
no, it's in home, residential, and daycare. It's just that it's the way it's drafted there. I can understand why you would not quite follow it.
Well, I do apologize, sir, but I was wanted to talk about East End, and I have a note down here on my end about the number of people currently housed at the East End home. Under this one that we're on now, I don't know if I can do it now.
Mr. McLean, given the fact that it is not clearly worded, even though we have already voted on the appropriation, I would reopen the vote just for the sake of, for discussion purposes. But we've already voted on the appropriation itself, so it's just for you to get clarification on anything you want to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my question is then, how many people do we have in the
But
home?
before you do that, let us complete our discussion on NGS 64. Let us complete our discussion on that, take the vote on that one, and then in between completing 64 and the next appropriation, we can discuss HCA 28. Okay? So are there any further questions on NGS 64? Okay, all those in favor of NGS 64, care of indigent, elderly, and disabled persons, for $1,400,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. Thank you. Okay, Mr. McLean, we can proceed to discuss HCA 28.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. Mr. Chairman, I am looking to find out how many people are at that home in East End.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. McLean, our capacity at East End Cottage is 6, and we have 6 residents currently.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my next question is, are there any clients there that need not necessarily be there?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. McLean, all residents who are there, to the best of my understanding, require that level of care. There are 2 males and 4 females.
And that facility, does that cater to people who can't come out?
It caters to persons, they may require supervision, but there are residents throughout the years who have been there who have been able to come out into the community.
My next question is a very loaded question. Are these homes and government taking care of Caymanians only?
We're providing care to Caymanians, persons who have some connection to Caymanians. We have one resident there who has permanent residence, who is a dependent of a Caymanian.
Was that person a resident, permanent residency when they went there?
To the best of my knowledge, sir. I would have to check. But she was the dependent of a Caymanian.
Are we Caymanian from where?
I'm sorry?
Are we Caymanian from where? In East End?
No, sir, from Bawden Town. But we have, in the absence of having a resource available, at the time, the placement was critical, and that was where we had a space available.
Critical in what way? Can you explain critical for me? Because obviously this client can get out on their own and go wherever they want, and it appears like it's only being used as housing, whilst there are Eastenders who need it. So I would like the explanation for critical.
Sir, at the time the placement was made, the person concerned was not able to provide self-care, and it was at the request of the medical personnel that they required at that time supervised care.
I noticed the emphasis on at that time. Mm-hmm. And certainly that situation has corrected itself. That was the question. Has that situation corrected itself?
The individual still requires some degree of supervised care.
Okay. I guess, Mr. Chairman, my next move is to get one built. We'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Moving on to NGS 65, General Programs and Children's Services for $117,180 on page 89 of the annual plan and estimates. If there are no questions, then let us proceed to the vote. All those in favor of NGS 65, General Programs and Children's Services, $117,180. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. Thank you. NGS 66, Foster Care for Children, $225,000 on page 90 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions?
We did foster care already, I guess. So.
All those in favor of NGS 66, Foster Care for Children, $225,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
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 NGS 67, Community Programs, $116,250, found on page 91 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this talks about after-school activities. Are these children or persons that government supports in the after-school children sponsored by the Education Department, in addition to all the funds that they're raising from the public?
Mr. Chairman, this vote is with respect to the purchase agreement between the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands and Rehoboth ministries, and with respect to an after-school program that is and has for many years been conducted at the T.E. Macfield.
Oh, okay. So this is only for that particular program?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this one again is made up of two outputs. One is with respect to the after-school program in the sum of $71,982, and the remainder is to the Georgetown Meals on Wheels program, which is $44,268.
If there are no further questions, all those in favor of NGS 67, community programs for $116,250, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
NGS 68, rental accommodation for persons in need, $1,600,000, found on page 9.2 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the persons who receive this rental assistance go through the same financial assessment that people go through at social services for the other programs from government?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is the same assessment process for all the welfare services, such as rental, school lunches, and burial.
Is there any monitoring of these persons after they qualify for the rental?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the assistance we give is temporary rental accommodations for a short-term period of 3 to 6 months, and there's no ongoing monitoring because it's just a temporary assistance.
So you determine as part of the evaluation how long the temporary is going to be, and that's what they get?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. We have a rental guarantee that we have the client sign with the landlord, in that it's not a lease, it's just a guarantee of payment for a specific period, which is usually 1, 3, or 6 months, depending on the situation, such as someone may be unemployed, which we know then 1 month might not be of great assistance to them.
So the person themselves makes the arrangement with the landlord, and you just assist them with some of the payments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Do you make the PO or the payment to the person or to the landlord?
The payment is made directly to the landlord.
I have had reports to me that people that have these POs show up in some real fancy cars to do the rental. And the person that reported to me was very concerned that the person, he didn't understand how they could be driving that kind of a car and qualify for rental assistance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, at the time of assessment, we have a release of information that is signed so that we can check on certain information, but we don't visually see the persons as they come, so we're unable to see what sort of vehicle they came in and to determine whether or not it's even their vehicle. But all we do is a financial assessment based on the information provided and based on the checks that we can gather.
Do you have one of those people that opens and closes doors in government dressed up like security at your office?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we actually have a police officer as security at the needs assessment unit due to safety concerns.
Okay. Do people who are coming out of prison, can they access this short-term rental, or is strictly a financial arrangement?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Prisoners coming out can qualify and apply for assistance, but in the circumstance where it's only a one-off for single able-bodied individuals, it's usually not going to be quite that beneficial if it's just 1 month that they would qualify for.
If there are no further questions, then all those in favor of NGS, sorry, Mr. Borden, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have missed it, but is there a limit? And not in terms of time, but in terms of amount?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have a annual limit per person and a lifetime limit per person. The annual limit per person is, or per family, is $10,000 and $50,000 for a lifetime cap. In regards to rental per month, the cap we currently have is $800 per month for an accommodation.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned this cap of 50,000 lifetime. And that applies there, it appears, to all of these welfare benefits that people get?
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently, it should apply to all welfare benefits that they get.
But is not a rather, what is the basis you use to calculate that 50,000 lifetime benefit? Because my concern is if you have an elderly person, what happens when they exceed the 50,000? They're cut off and...
Through you, Mr. Chair, for the permanent poor relief, which is the $550 stipend usually given to elderly and disabled, there is no lifetime cap. For the temporary, which is usually rental, school lunches, and burial assistance, there is a cap of the $10,000 and the $50,000. So the elderly wouldn't be disadvantaged.
Mr. Miller, is there a follow-up question? Are there any further questions? All those in favor of NGS 68, rental accommodation for persons in need, $1,600,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. NGS 70, burial assistance for indigents, $150,000, found on page 93. Are there any questions? All those in favor of NGS 70, burial assistance for indigents, $150,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. NGS 71, support for battered women and children, $300,000, found on page 94. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I guess it's nigh on 14 years now I've been asking about this one. And that is, what about men? Does government provide assist and the support for battered men? Mr. Chairman, let me ask it this way then, since it is not, it's fallen on barren ears out there. Are we finding in this place that we have men who fall in this category?
I think the question is, have we ever had any men come forward and request assistance because of domestic abuse?
Linda, you come answer that because you're shaking your nodding there. Yeah, you answer. You go ahead.
Paulinda Mendoza Williams, Deputy Director, Children and Family Services. We have had instances where we have had to address domestic violence involving male victims, and the procedure would be that we would place them in safe accommodations. Mainly, we would secure a hotel room or have them stay with a friend or family member.
Thank you, Ms. Mendoza Williams.
You're welcome.
But don't leave yet. Can I ask then, Mr. Chairman, why is it that we just do it as battered women? I think it should be battered stroke women stroke men, because I don't think it's something that we should be ashamed of. men get abused too.
Mr. Chairman, the reason why it's expressed this way in the schedule, I believe, is because that's meant to summarize the arrangement set out in the purchase agreement between the Cabinet and the Cayman Islands Crisis Center. And the outputs, the Cayman Crisis Center relate to CIC 1, Emergency Shelter for Women and Their Children, the Crisis Lines, which is CIC 2, and CIC 3, Community Outreach Program, CIC 4, Shelter Follow-Up Program. So I suspect that is why it's expressed that way.
Okay, well, that means for the men, then it would be elsewhere represented in the budget, I guess, under the Social Services Department.
Right, right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I guess the next move is to now make another building where we go for men. We making it for women, men, West Bay, with the name, the Bridge Foundation for drug abuse. So we separate them there. I guess maybe we can now separate the women and the men now too. Yes, ma'am.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in regards to the annual stats on male victims, usually we see one or two coming through the department expressing that circumstance. However, we do try to assist as best we can with the resources. So looking in the future, hopefully we don't have to address either men or women for domestic violence, because we would have addressed them as in a social program. So,
Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, do you believe that one or two men coming forward is a true representation of what's going on in the society, given your experience in it?
through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Miller, I do not believe that that's a true reflection, but because of the society that we live in, men tend to not want to report domestic violence against.
Mr. Miller, is there another question? Mr. Eden?
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I see it's one more heading to go after this, and the only place that I see that I may be able to fit this more of a comment in is number 12, Equity and Justice. Last year, Mr. Chairman, as reported in the daily newspaper, when a 4-year-old was raped, and the then judge decided to give it was 30 days or 3 months. They alluded that a social worker or social work report was done saying that that person deemed, words to this effect, that it wouldn't affect the child. I must say still is disappointed that someone coming from, whether it's from the Department of Children and Family Services or where, could possibly think that a child that young could not be affected. And I just wanted to express my concern at this time about that happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eden. If there are no further questions, all those in favor of NGS 71, support for battered women and children, support for battered women and children for $300,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. NGS 72, therapeutic services for young persons for $25,000, found on page 95 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, there's some consternation on our part here with respect to what the Mr. Eden just said, and I think it's important that we clear up the fact that that wasn't said or wasn't written by anyone from Children and Family Services. I can ask Mrs. Mendoza Williams to go into a little more detail about it.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Ms. Williams?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of the details of such a case, but I do know when social workers are required to make certain recommendations and provide social inquiry reports in regards to such serious matters such as child sexual abuse, we do not, as good social work practice, respond in stating that it would be of no consequence to the child as the child gets older. And we would make the necessary referrals for intervention for the child and the family to receive therapeutic treatment via from a private organization or from Department of Counseling Services. So if that was the case, it may have well been that it came from a private organization requested by the court to provide some psychiatric assessment, but it would not have come from the Department of Children and Family Services.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
Thank God, Mr. Chairman, and as we pass that legislation, and once again, this is not in continuation of that, I noticed that in the paper yesterday or day before, another thing has happened, and the minimum penalty as this parliament has passed, hoping that the legislation will soon come, was 5 years for abuse and whatever thing against women, that we expedite this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of NGS 72, therapeutic services for young persons, $25,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. I would just like to bring to your attention on page 95, NGS 72, the 2013-14 forecast of 2,000 should actually be 25,000.
I wondered about that.
Page 95, 2013-14 forecast, written there as 2,000 should actually be 25,000. Turning now to transfer payments. TP 41, poor relief payments, $6,260,000, found on page 285 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Page 285. Are there any questions? All those in favor of TP 41, poor relief payments of $6,260,000, standing part of the payment to the schedule, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. TP 43, poor relief vouchers for $1,500,000, found on page 285 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe that we were supposed to get some statistics on, Mr. Conley may have asked for how many people were on assistance. When is, can somebody explain to me when the commitment was given to provide that?
Sorry, what was that, Mr. McLean?
I think Mr. Conley asked for the amount of people on social assistance. and there was a commitment given that it would be provided. I'm just trying to clarify when it was, what commitment was given on the time.
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall that we actually specified a time. We said we'd do our best to get in the information that had been asked for. Let me see if I can check on where we are with it.
What's that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm being told we can get it for Monday.
Okay, I thought it was today because we're coming to an end and I wanted to.
Thank you. Mr. McTaggart?
Numbers there, Mr. Chairman, looking at upwards 945 to 1,000 people, costing 6.2. Just comparing TP 41 to 43. The numbers look a bit skewed in terms of, sort of an average per person assisted.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the answer is that TP 41 is with respect to permanent and financial assistance payments to the elderly and disabled. So that is something that is ongoing every month. Whereas the poor relief vouchers are short and medium-term financial assistance, so that people may get that for as short as a month, or they may get it for up to 3 months.
Okay.
And lesser amounts.
Okay.
Possibly lesser amounts.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, then all those in favor of TP 43, poor relief vouchers for $1,500,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. TP 44, temporary poor relief for young parents programs students, $30,000. Found on page 286 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions?
Aye.
If there are no questions, then all those in favor of TP 44, temporary poor relief for young parents program students for $30,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
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 TP 45, youth aftercare payments for $60,000, found on page 286. Are there any questions? All those in favor of TP, sorry, Ms. Rivers, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, what exactly does the aftercare payments go towards in terms of the program that's run, I'm assuming?
Sorry, can you repeat? What exactly does the aftercare program?
What does this vote relate to in terms of the service that's delivered?
Mr. Chairman, to Minister Rivers, through you, the youth aftercare payments are to look after the needs of children who have been in residential care, whether foster care or in Keys care, who are aging out of the system, leaving home. If they're not able to be reintegrated with their own families for some reason, this amount helps us to help them transition into young adulthood for a period of time so that they won't fall back. They'll continue moving forward. It's a small number of children.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, then all those in favor of TP 45, youth aftercare payments for $60,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. TP 46, emergency relief payments for $30,000, found on page 286. Are there any questions?
Aye.
If there are no questions, then all those in favor of TP 46, emergency relief payments for 30,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. TP 47, ex gratia benefit payments to seamen, $5,099,556, found on page 286. Are there any questions? Mr. McTaggart?
Yes, sir, through, you'd like to know if, do we have a list of people waiting or with applications pending for this vote?
Answer is yes, a very long list.
And I guess as a supplementary, will the vote here be able to accommodate all of those requests, or are we looking for continuing deferrals?
No, sir, it won't.
Thank you.
I should say is that the cabinet, well, the caucus and the cabinet of the government have been giving consideration to this issue. We have a number of recommendations that are being made by the ministry, and over the course of the next few months, we need to come to some decisions about this issue, because the cost, rather than going down, is climbing, and the number of persons on the waiting list just keeps growing. At the moment, we cannot accommodate anyone else on the list unless someone comes off, and usually they only come off by virtue of death or if they move overseas, and even when they die, we wind up having to continue the payment to their widow, and increasingly the widows are younger and younger.
Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if they said how many people are on the list currently.
As of the 31st of last month, there were 793.
$793. Mr. Chairman, can I then ask if it's growing, do we see a trend towards a slower growth than in previous years?
No, it's actually the other way, because what is happening, as you, Mr. McLean, as an old seaman will know, you're getting closer and closer to 60. So more and more people are reaching the 60 years who have left the sea now, in some instances for 30 years, but they're now reaching that point where they qualify for the payment.
Well, I believe that the end of the baby boomers are drawing nigh, and that's when the sailing stopped, the baby boomers. And there weren't very too many of us that sailed. So I don't know where they're getting these affidavits from. But in my age group, at the end of the baby boom, the end of the baby boomers, there weren't many of us. Now this is just prior to that maybe, but it should be start to go down.
That's what we think too, but it's not happening.
I mean, I spoke to someone about this the other day, and I was trying to count up those of us who went from like the year before me in school to just after me, and it seemed to have cut off the year that, to a great extent, the year that I graduated from school, my age group, and the next year, there weren't many people, probably maybe a half a dozen.
Yeah. Well, of course, I am much younger than you, but when
I don't say much for you. What? Go ahead.
When the year that we graduated, the 78, we were kind of doing the numbers. Myself and a friend, And I think we counted 6 of us who actually may have made one trip. So, yeah, I agree with you.
And you don't qualify.
Yeah.
You got to, not many people made one trip and did 3 years. I mean, most of them were one up and one down. So there can't be that much now. Over the next 3 to 5 years, there should be a serious reduction in it, of applications. Everybody, Mark.
Thank Mr. McLean. Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Ebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering whether or not the ministry can say if there can be any provisions made, because I know of guys that have been on the waiting list for a couple of years and who are well deserving, who served their time and well deserving of the ex gratia payments. Is there any consideration for making any other arrangements that these needy and well-deserving seamen can get any kind of compensation?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing we could do would be to increase the budget. Under the present budget, we simply don't have the means to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Premier.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir. I can understand where the Premier is coming from. However, it's unfair for some of the real needy seamen and deserving to not be able to get it while others are getting it. And I understand if the budget needs to be increased, I know it won't be done this budget year, but I mean, there need to be some consideration given for those additional men who've been waiting for a couple of years, a few years, well, to get on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Ebanks. Mr. Connolly, you had a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. What is the current criteria for these payments in terms of when a seaman passes away? What happens to those payments?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the current arrangement is that the surviving spouse then has to put in an application to get the benefit and has to go through the process of meeting the criteria that we currently have in place, which is being over 60, income less than per month, 2,000 per month on the present criteria. Being Cayman, sorry, and resident in Cayman.
Okay, because it occurs to me that if we don't tighten up on that criteria, then we'll never have a declining balance because it'll just keep being passed on and passed on. I think it should pass with the passing of that seaman, right? Because I agree with the captain in that there are people that are deserving that aren't on the list, and there are people that we all know that aren't deserving that are on, right? So unless there's some sort of audit that goes on, then we'll never get to the bottom of this, and they'll always have that position because no one's coming off the list basically, right? So I guess I'd like to get to a position where the people that are deserving of it are the ones that are actually getting, and if there are people that are on it that weren't supposed to be on it, we should try to correct that situation because it's not fair for the ones that haven't or did the work, went to sea, etc., to know that somebody else is on it because they went from a trip from here to Jamaica and back.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad. I think it's one of those issues, pretty much like the social services programs that we have, where we need to determine who's really in need and who isn't, and then make the necessary decision. Mr. Bodden, you had a question, sir?
It's become more of an observation now after various comments, Mr. Chairman, but when this was set up originally, it was set up to decline, to basically fall away as our seamen moved on to their eternal rest. But it's sad that it's come to this, and I think we have to take some serious policy decisions in regards to this matter. If for instance, a seaman, one of the things that's happened now, the tragic thing is that apart from the people that Captain Eugene is talking about, which are talking about, that is those who deserve and are not getting, we have former wives who were there when these men were at sea and did what they had to do in Cayman, who are no longer getting. So they are disenfranchised. Then we have the young wives, they're coming on, and I think that one of the things that can be done in relation to that is to say, well, if you're going to go and marry young, they're certainly not going to get until they reach retirement age at least. That's how it is. That's how it is? Okay, well, that's good to know. But it's really, this shouldn't be a growing number. This should be a declining number, sadly. But we have to seriously make sure that who's getting are well deserving.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, you had a question or a comment?
Just briefly to say, like the minister, this thing was sold wrong from the beginning. This was devised, thought out, put in place to win the 2000 election. It was thought out wrong from the beginning. It was sold to the people that if you went to sea, you were entitled to it. And that's how people continue to expect it. And that government of 96 to 2000, they tried to win an election by placating the seamen with an ex gratia payment.
If there are there any further questions? Are there any further questions? If there are no further questions with respect to this appropriation, then we will proceed to vote. All those in favor of TP 47, ex gratia benefit payments to seamen, $5,099,556, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And those against, no. TP 48, ex gratia benefit payments to ex-servicemen, $1,128,600, found on page 286 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions?
No.
Mr. McLean?
No, tell me about no why. Mr. Chairman, it is interesting that we have between 170 and 180 ex-servicemen. In the heights of World War II, we didn't have that much. Where are they coming from? And when the last time we went to war or supported a war? Somebody need to answer that one.
That's a very valid question, Mr. McLean. To whom are we paying service payments? Which wars were they fighting that we should be responsible for it?
Mr. Chairman, as far as I'm aware, the criteria that was established, and a long time before we had anything to do with it, is that if the person is Caymanian and they have served in any of the wars, they qualify as veterans. And if you are a veteran, you receive this payment. But my understanding is that no one's been added since when?
No, they keep reducing. No one has been added since 97.
No one's been added since 97, and the numbers are coming down.
And we're still catering for 170 to 180?
Because the widows get as well, you see.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, but I think the public needs to know. I need to know. The inquiring mind needs to know. Next Saturday, we're going to see a parade out here honoring the Queen. And I only see about 3, 4, maybe 6 in line. Where the rest of them are?
But I guess they're unable
to attend,
or as I say, many have passed on, but they have widows.
It's interesting. I mean, it's a very interesting subject. I know there's a gentleman in East End who was what they call home guard or something like that, that doesn't get it. I spoke to them recently about it. But let me ask then, Mr. Chairman, it's quite nice you say which wars, because, and the Premier said, if you're a veteran, meaning you have served in one war, is that the only criteria, or are you going to be making less than 2002?
You have to what?
Or your income is less than 2,000 per month, like the poor relief thing,
no,
seaman thing.
No, the criteria here is not based on income at all.
What? The seaman shouldn't be either.
Well, all I can say, Mr. Chairman, is that we are operating with the criteria that has existed for however long it's been since we took office. It is something that we are currently looking at.
Because, Mr. Chairman, I know there are young Caymanians who served in Afghanistan and this way and that way. Is it that, but it didn't serve in Afghanistan for us, in our war, but for the freedom of the world, whichever we want to call it, would they be getting it if they apply as veterans as well?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the ex-servicemen, I think it was around 95, 96, that the government made a decision to give them an ex gratia benefit. There was a cutoff point sometime 96, 97, where it was only World War I, World War II, and the Trinidad War. And after that, nobody else has been added to that. So that was, I think it was around 95. It was before I joined the ministry anyway. It was around 95, 96. And no persons has been added since.
How many persons were...
Those who served in the Trinidad Navy. Yeah. Not the Trinidad War.
No.
How many persons were receiving... So just to be clear, is it that if there's a surviving veteran and spouse, that during his lifetime, then the payment is made only to the veteran himself? And then upon his passing, the spouse does she receive the same payment, or half, or 3/4?
Same payment.
The same payment. Okay. So we have 170, 180. At the outset, what is the highest number of recipients that we've had?
It was in the 200s, I think, but I don't have those figures with me. I would say around 230, 250, somewhere around that range originally.
Fair enough. Mr. Conley, you had a question, followed by Mr. McTaggart. No, Conley first, then Mac. Okay, Mr. McTaggart, he's giving you way.
Okay, thank you, Winston. Through you, sir, an ex-serviceman receiving payments under TP 48, is he also, if he was a seaman, can he also receive payments under TP 47 as well?
Mr. Chairman, through you, no, they can't receive. They're both service-oriented, and so the ex-servicemen do not receive the seaman's ex gratia benefits.
Okay.
Mr. Conley?
That was one of my questions as well, but Mr. Chairman, through you, and I don't know if this is an observation or I don't know what it is, but we need to rectify the situation. Bad decisions made by previous governments shouldn't be carried on indefinitely by governments trying to do the right thing. We need to rectify this situation, this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Conley.
Mr. Chairman, my observation about that to Mr. Conley is he's part of the caucus and therefore responsible for making decisions, whether it's to change or to keep it. So when this matter comes to caucus, as it will, let's hope we all have the courage of our convictions and what we say publicly, we can actually do.
I certainly do, sir. You can put that up front right here, right now.
Well, I applaud you all for doing that because there are some very, 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 very rich people who used to be out in the middle of the street who has no pass. And I'm 99% certain their wives gotten it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McLean. If there are no further questions with respect to this appropriation, we'll proceed to the vote. So all those in favor of TP 48, ex gratia benefit payments to ex-servicemen for $1,128,600, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. TP 50, preschool assistance, $150,000 on page 286. Are there any questions? Minister Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. Through you, can we get an explanation as to the age range that this assistance relates to with respect to preschool?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The age range is children up to the age of 3 years and 9 months.
Thank you. And starting at what age?
0 to 3 years up to 9 months. And 9 months, sorry.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, is the same assessment process that you would do to determine other services, is that applied with respect to applicants for preschool assistance as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. That is correct.
And is it a service that has to be, so once you're given and once you qualify, is it something that you do on an annual basis, on a term basis? How does the program actually work for the benefit of the listening public?
The program is also considered a temporary financial assistance, which is anywhere from 1 month, 3 months to a maximum of 6 months in any given fiscal year.
Thank you, Minister Rivers. If there are no further questions, then all those in favor of TP 50, preschool assistance for $150,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. TP 57, children and family services support, $581,938, found on page 287 of the AP&E. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, when we buy all this furniture, what happens to it? Or when we buy furniture, I can't say all this furniture, I shouldn't say all this furniture, but when we buy furniture, what happens to it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the request for furniture assistance is usually for dire need, and it's very infrequent. I could probably try to get the percentage of that, but it's maybe 1 to 2 cases per year.
But what happens to it?
The furniture remains with the individual.
Is there a follow-up question, Mr. McLean? Mr. Saku?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just had a follow-up question. What sort of, could you give some examples of items that would constitute other client needs that fall under this vote?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The services under TP 57 is usually utilities, optical, for instance, dentures, clothing allowance. Those are the basic services that you receive through there. Medical travel assistance also.
Are there any further questions? If there are no further questions, then all those in favor of TP 57, Children and Family Services support $581,938, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. EI 54, Ministry of Home and Community Affairs, $542,000, found on page 293 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? EI 54. I'll go back to 70. Members, it appears that I've skipped over OE 78, but we'll go back to that. So we will continue looking at EI 54, found on page 293 of the AP&E. EI 54, Ministry of Home and Community Affairs. It's an equity investment to purchase entity assets. $542,000. Are there any questions? All those in favor.
What would that compose the equity?
So obviously,
Into assets. It went from 115 to $500,000.
Mr. Chairman, there's, in that sum, is $250,000, or I should say, are $250,000 to support relocation of the Maple House facility. And there's $7,500 for new office accommodation equipment for the needs assessment unit and a printer as well. That's $15,000. There is also, or there are also building upgrades and other assets for upgrades to the Caribbean Haven Residential Center, $220,000 to complete full renovation of the kitchen facilities identified as critical through health and safety inspection and other outstanding repairs to ensure client and staff safety and well-being. And there are $49,500 for computer equipment and other assets for the Family Resource Center, new office accommodation, as well as the counseling center. Total $542,000.
thank you, Mr. Premier. Are there any further questions? If there are no further questions, then all those in favor of EI 54, Ministry of Home and Community Affairs for $542,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
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 And those against, no. Appropriation OE 78, depreciation of Ministry of Home and Community Affairs executive assets. Community Affairs, $27,000, found on page 290. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, then all those in favor of OE 78, depreciation of Ministry of Home and Community Affairs executive assets, Community Affairs, $27,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, just to make sure of something, NGS 72 therapeutic services for young persons, did we vote on that
Yes, sir, we did.
in the sum of 25,000?
Yes, sir, we did.
Okay, good. Mr. Chairman, I believe that concludes the appropriations for the Ministry of Home and Community Affairs.
Yes, sir, it does.
And I would just like to thank the director and all her staff who came and so ably assisted. They're lucky they get home at 5. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stay and do the cabinet office. I just want to also say to the committee that we have an undertaking to provide some additional information, and we'll have that on Monday, God willing.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
sorry to go back to this page 287, TP 60. Who does that fall under? I see it's a 0 in there.
287 TP 60.
It's one of the few things that have a 0 into the column.
Mr. Chairman, that was the broader that the last administration had gotten from the DART group. We don't get any more of that.
I just wonder, Mr. Chairman, if broader, whatever, there's so much need for some housing repairs, whether, and then once again, we'll discuss this with the Premier to try to find something for this great need that I know exists out there. Housing repairs.
Thank you, Mr. Eden. We will now consider the appropriations for the Cabinet Office. We will take a 15-minute break, allowing the Cabinet Office staff time to enter the chamber and prepare themselves. So it's approximately 4:30 p.m. and we will resume at 4:45.